Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Your Old Anatomy Professor. I'm Becky Edmiston, your old anatomy professor. Today, we are going to review genetics. Now, we talked about with the cell how problems at the nucleus are generally considered genetic. And so when you get into genetic disorders, you have to remember at least a little bit about DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. This is the molecule that houses all the information for how to make every protein in the body. Remember, this molecule is made up of 4 nucleic acids: adenine, A, thymine with a T, guanine, G, and cytosine with a C. A simple change in even just one of these nucleic acids can cause a genetic disorder. Now, what's really important to recall here is that the DNA, in order to turn that information into a protein, goes through 2 processes. So here we see transcription, where the DNA housed in the nucleus. Remember, this is like a library book on reserve. It's got really important information and you can't take it out of the library. So we're going to make a copy of it. In this case, that is called messenger RNA. The messenger RNA is the molecule that actually leaves the nucleus and is read by the ribosome, who reads the code 3 letters at a time and brings in the corresponding amino acid to build a polypeptide chain, which eventually folds into the protein we were looking for. So when we're talking about genetic disorders, this change in the DNA is causing some sort of change in a protein that the body should be producing. So these diseases can have a huge variety of signs and symptoms. All right, a little bit more review about DNA. So that segment of DNA that houses information is called a gene. You may recall that you can have different versions of that gene. The term for that is allele. So here they're showing you might have the allele, the gene for purple flowers, or the allele, the gene for white flowers. Again, recall that those genes can either be dominant or recessive. Remember what that means? If a gene is dominant, you only need 1 copy for that gene to show up in the phenotype, right? To be expressed as a trait. In order for a recessive trait to appear, you need what? 2 copies of that recessive gene. Good. And so here, when we look at this particular example, we would say that this, in this case, remember Mendel and his peas, this is about flowers. We would say that this individual is heterozygous. It has a copy of each. And so sure enough, it's going to inherit this dominant, in this case, purple trait. If you had 2 copies of the same allele, homozygous would be the term there. Now, you are going to see that what we told you in anatomy was an oversimplification. One of the things that becomes really important is something called penetrance. And this is the ratio of individuals with a genotype where that gene actually shows up in the phenotype. And so you'll see that come up. Other things to think about with DNA. So we're learning more and more about the DNA, and a lot of the genes for specific genetic disorders have actually been located. A lot of them will know what chromosome it's found on and exactly what location that gene is located at. That is called the locus, or loci for plural, the location of that particular gene. And so if you hear about, say, BRCA1, the breast cancer 1 gene, we know what chromosome and what location on that chromosome we would find that gene. And that allows genetic testing, right, to actually look for that gene within individuals. Last thing I want to remind you of, you might have to do some Punnett squares as you think about disease. The 2 terms you'll hear, autosomal inheritance and sex-linked inheritance. So recall you have 23 pair of chromosomes. The 23rd chromosome is the sex chromosome, right? If you have 2 X chromosomes, you're female. If you have an X and a Y, that would make a male. A sex-linked genetic disorder is almost always found on the X chromosome. Anything found on chromosomes 1 through 22 then would be considered autosomal and would follow the rules of autosomal inheritance. those inheritance patterns are slightly different. All right, I hope you enjoy learning more about genetics and how that is going to affect disease.